Good morning and welcome to this, the first in a four-part series on operational resilience. The structure of this will be maximum of 1 hour. I'll speak for maybe about 40 minutes and give you guys a chance to ask questions. You can submit them in the chat, or the Q&As might be best. The other three will be on succeeding Tuesdays with a gap of 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks for the next 6 weeks. Here's the details. So if you have them in your diary, if you haven't registered, you'll see it's every Tuesday. So put it in your diary. Now, today is about incident response planning. I haven't picked a particular running order for these. We do workshops as well, 2-hour workshops, and we'll be doing a series of them in March and April. That's different. They have exercises. I'll talk more about them later. These are free. These webinars are free, and we're picking 4 aspects from operational resilience that we wanted to focus on. Some time ago, we did a lunchtime learning on incident response planning, and I think I spoke for the whole of the 15 minutes, and people said, very interesting, but not enough time. So today I will speak for a little longer and a bit more detail. Okay, this is what today looks like. We'll look at the elements of a general incident response plan first, what's in that, but only briefly. We're going to focus on a cyber attack response. It's the essence, the response part of it is different, but you know, for the most part, I would say 80% of response plans are generic. It's the 20% then that will be scenario or incident type specific. A few words, the difference between an incident and a crisis. When does an incident become a crisis? But some principles for managing a crisis, which there's no black art there, but it is interesting to see the 10 principles. I pulled them from a technical specification from ISO. I just wanted to emphasize communications during an incident, often something that we forget to do, fail to do, neglect, whatever word you want to put on it, but it is important. And if you have a plan, it's important to test your plan. I prefer to call it an exercise to improve your plan. Okay. For those of you who don't know us, and we have a good crowd on today, and I recognize a lot of you, but some of you are new, so you're welcome. calQrisk, the company, is, I would say, we see ourselves as risk and compliance professionals. And when we speak to you, most of you are risk and compliance professionals as well. I'm glad to see there aren't too many IT people here today, because this isn't an IT session. But we try to keep our skills sharp by being members of various organizations like the Institute of Risk Management, Institute of Bankers, Compliance Ireland, etc. We make a GRC, our governance, risk and compliance tool, called calQrisk as well, the product. We started trading as calQrisk when people start calling us calQrisk after the product. It's a cloud-based solution and requires no in-house installation, just configuration. We also offer risk advisory service. Consider that like a risk expert at the end of the phone, somebody, a consultant that you can call on, but also we do specific webinars and training and provide specific materials to people who sign up to that service. Details on this are on our website. Our software is used, I would say, 2 sectors: financial services generally, broadly, where there's fund management, credit unions, insurance brokers, and also in the not-for-profit sector, like housing associations, charities, and sports organizations. That's us. Okay. Now, one of my favorite quotes from Dwight Eisenhower: "In preparing for battle, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable." And this from the man who was closely involved in the planning for D-Day, for the D-Day landing at the end of the Second World War. And I think what he's saying here is, it's not the plan that's important, it's actually the planning. The effort you go through to generate a plan, the considerations, the contingencies you have to think about, the options, all of that brain power that you apply to producing the plan, that's what will stand to you when you do have an incident, because no plan will ever, reflect the next disaster. The people in Middleton a year ago, if you told them they were going to be flooded, most would have said, no, it hasn't happened in my lifetime. But then you ask the people in Leitrim if they would have believed a tornado would hit them this year. So you never know what the next disaster is going to be. But if you have a decent plan, you can adapt the plan to whatever the scenario is. Okay. I thought before we jump into incident response planning, just to give it context, if you accept Basel Committee's definition of resilience, and I like it, it's succinct, it's the ability to deliver critical operations through disruption. Right? So not interruption, go to continuity and then deliver it. No, you're straight into continuing to deliver through disruption. Now, you might be able to deliver everything, which is why the emphasis here is on critical operations. So in the planning, obviously, you've got to identify what's critical and what you have to continue to deliver through disruption. So that's all feeds into how you approach resilience. I see, and I think Basel would agree with me, that resilience is a culmination or an outcome of multiple functions: good risk management, good information security, incident management, and I'm including crisis management in that, business continuity, and disaster recovery. Not just IT. I think I would drop the IT from that one and just say disaster recovery, because it can be facilities that you've got to recover as well from a tornado, for example, or a flood. I think because life is complex now, I don't imagine in many organizations that one person would be able to have the expertise, to drive all of these. You might have, depending on the size of your organization, certainly a resilience champion at a senior level. But I think these are 5 disciplines that need focus. Now, yes, maybe business continuity and disaster recovery might be grouped together, but depending on your organization. From a timeline point of view, this is how I would see it. Prior to an incident happening, and as a risk expert myself, I would have to say, of course, prevent the incidents in the first place. The less incidents you have to manage, the better. So certainly from a risk management point of view, and we're not going to talk about that today, generally not in the series, because we've probably flogged that with other webinars, but you identify the threats, the things that threaten your objectives, your operations, and you put measures in place to prevent those undesirable events happening. Today, we're going to talk about incident management, which is when you have an incident, what kicks into place? How do you react? And you have to assume that it's not going to be conveniently at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. More likely, it's going to be at 11:30 on a Friday night that you'd have, possibly a cyber attack, because that is a favorite time. But okay, so that's the overview. Because we're talking about operational resilience and we're talking about an incident, I'm going to make the assumption that the focus is on those incidents that disrupt the delivery of a service, any service, your business. And in one of the workshops that we do, we get people to identify, well, what can cause a disruption? And here you see a summary of the key areas, a system failing, a system. And most services today, we rely on some system to deliver the service. A building loss, tornado, a flood, so, severe weather event, or could be electricity outage. You have no power and you have no generator. The building isn't much use to you. People, we've seen pandemics, so we all know how we cope with fewer people. Financial, third party, and again, we will have a session one just on third parties, but if your third party has a disruption and if they're critical to the delivery of a service, of a critical service, then that affects you. And what about if the regulator steps in and says, stop doing that until you fix this? So there are various disruptions, but today we're going to focus on cyber. But before we focus on the cyber, just a word to just a general incident response plan. I would see it here in 5 headings. Prepare, and we'll look in a moment what prepare is. You know, who are in the teams that you're going to need depending on the particular scenario. How would you identify if you've got an incident, and what type of incident, and how are you going to respond? Because that feeds into the response. You respond, address the incident, you recover back to normal, depending on how long you were out. The recovery might take longer. And a key part of any plan is you have that post-mortem, that review of how you did. Now, today we're going to expand that and expand the respond bit into contain and eradicate, because that's generally how responding to a cyber attack is perceived. All of the other bits, I would argue, are common to most of your scenarios. It's just when you get down to the detailed scenario, what was it, a flood, a tornado, a cyber attack? Is there a detail in how you respond? But the principles for the rest of it will be the same for everything. So on the basis that it's a cyber attack, I'm going to proceed. Now, this looks technical, and yes, the responses might be a lot in the technical area. But if you're risk or compliance, or you're the COO or the CEO, and I know we have all of you on the call today, I want you to understand this concept because it will give you hopefully the basis for asking the questions of somebody who can address these things. The cyber kill chain, it's not something I invented. It was actually from Lockheed Martin many years ago, and they saw this as 7 links, and probably there's 8 today. I think the 8th one would be where they monetize maybe what they've stolen from you, but we will stick with the original 7. And the idea is, if 7 is when you get to see the cyber attack, the bad guys are in and they've encrypted your data and they're demanding money or whatever they are doing, you think it's too late now. Well, the idea of this is that there's 7 points, 7 steps or 7 stages at which you can thwart those efforts. If we take the first one, and I've written the text here a little bit bigger so you can read it, reconnaissance. Now, if we're talking about a robber breaking into your building, you talk about casing the joint, okay? So reconnaissance, where the bad guys are looking for a weakness. They'll scan your network, you know, from the outside, see can they break in? You know, a bit like the house, you know, are you leaving doors open? And indeed, electronically as well. They're called ports. And, you know, when you get a pen test done, the pen test guys will tell you, you got to close those ports because they give the bad guys access. So reconnaissance, what can the bad guys learn about you? In a famous case in the States, Target, they had a case study up in Microsoft where they divulged way too much information about how the network was structured. They got attacked. The bad guys had like a blueprint of their whole network. It was madness, absolute madness. But how much information are you giving away? Do you have email addresses on your website that people can harvest and then send phishing emails to? Well, my response to that is you give nothing away, right? Don't tell the bad guys, don't tell anybody anything, you know, except what you have to. So be careful. Now, I'm only going to give one response to each of these, but you know, the 7 things, there's probably 28 actions you could take. So let's look at number 2. The bad guys have now discovered you're using a particular server, and they know of the vulnerabilities of that server, and they've found a way in. So they're going to build what's referred to as a payload. It's call it malware that is going to exploit that vulnerability. So the advice to you is patch those vulnerabilities. Now, we patch at the latest in 2 weeks. We patch critical ones immediately when we learn of vulnerabilities. It's interesting to note that something of the order of 90% of successful attacks are exploiting vulnerabilities that have been known for more than 6 months. So what does that tell you? You know, that if more people patched those vulnerabilities sooner, we'd have a lot less successful attacks. Then there's the delivery, where they created the payload, and now they've got to send it to you somehow. How do they get it into your network? Well, it might be, and the most favorite one is a malicious link in a legitimate looking email. You know, you've won the Spanish lottery. Click here to claim your prize. You know, you're asking, do people really click on those links today? They do. But I have to admit, they've got more sophisticated, and the emails look legit. So you've got to train your people and retrain the people and remind them, you know, if you're not expecting it, if it looks dodgy, it probably is. And better you don't click on a link that was legit than you do and start a whole chain of action. Exploit. So assuming somebody does click on the link and it wants to install bad stuff on your network, this is where restricting a user's access rights to just what they need for the job will pay dividends. Well, when I say pay dividends, it limits the scope of the bad guys. We don't have anybody in the organization who has full privileged rights as access to everything. If I want to install anything, there's a different username and password I have to use for that action. So we've gone away from this idea of having somebody with privileged access to everything all the time, because if you're on the internet and you've got privileged access and you get compromised, now the bad guys have the master key to the house. So limit access. Then installing software. So who can install software on the assets? Well, you want to limit that as well. And you want to deploy tools like antivirus software, which will give you some protection. It's not the only one, but this is why you have antivirus, not just to detect that there's a virus, but to block the installation of that. And when they do, if they do manage to install something on your network, the bad guys then use what's called command and control. It's where they create a channel into your network and are working on that system and doing all the bad things that they do. So some command and control servers are actually known. And if your IT guys are good, they will have blocked in the firewall any access from any of those known command and control servers out there. But you could also have an allow list and as well as a deny list and restrict who can access what from where. So that's what firewalls are about, you know, and intrusion protection systems. So, you know, have good locks on the door and good gatekeepers, and, you know, only allow people in that you know are secure. You know, two-factor authentication, if you're going to allow remote access, is now the norm. Like I said, I'm only putting one idea up on each of these, but there's probably 4 or 5 in each of the steps. So despite all your efforts, the bad guys still get in, and they're carrying out nefarious deeds. Will you know? How will you know if the bad guys are in? You'll need intrusion detection as well as intrusion prevention and monitoring tools to monitor the unusual behavior. Now, I'm sorry for maybe belaboring this one, the kill chain, but I wanted to give you a sense that there are things you can do before an event. Okay, so let's now look at the incident response plan, because I've used up probably a lot of time, but I hope that was useful for non-IT people as well, and probably gives you some background as to why IT are limiting certain things. I hope I've translated it into English for you. Okay, so if we take the response plan and how it is structured, I'm going to take the prepare bit, you see here, and I will break that down into team composition. Depending on the size of your organization, I know some of you are small, maybe just of 10 people, and some of you are a couple of hundred. So think of it this way. Think of an operations team. Think of a senior leadership team. Think of a, maybe it's the HR and facilities. I'm thinking how generically, how maybe medium-sized organizations might break this down. Because depending on the incident, I mean, if it was a building loss, then somebody with facilities expertise is probably best to guide that. If it's a cyber attack, then probably your security officer. Now we're talking about a cyber attack here. So you have your team composition, and maybe it's teams. Maybe you have the IT response team and you have the senior leadership team who's going to handle the communication to the outside world, etc. If it's a data breach, then your DPO is certainly going to be involved. I would always have a liaison person in the team for the communication. We'll talk about more of that later. And if it's a cyber attack, very few of you would have the skills in-house. And I'm talking about forensic skills that a forensic IT expert would have, but you're going to need them. And it's not the time to be looking in the golden pages for the name of whether it's an Espion or a Ritz or a Ward Solutions or one of the many companies in Ireland that provide these services. You need to have had a phone call with them beforehand and have introduced yourself. So they need to be on your call list. Okay, contact information for your own staff, and bear in mind that you may not have access to this electronically. So good to have maybe a copy on your phone or a hard copy in your briefcase. And not just for your own staff, but third parties, because I think any service we deliver nowadays, we're dependent on third parties. So do have the name. I know of one customer a few years ago who lost the telephone system, and their account manager was actually on holidays, and nobody in the telephone company knew of their account because it was actually registered under their, I think under the parent name, and it was different to their actual name. And it was a disaster because they couldn't find anybody who would take their call and react seriously. So, have contacts, have numbers that work. Things that you prepare for, it seems like an obvious thing to say, but are you doing backups? Backup daily, hourly, at least a daily. And do you keep a copy of that backup off the network? And if you haven't heard this before, I mean, the reason you keep it off the network is so that if the bad guys get in and they compromise the whole network, your backup is compromised as well. So you want to keep it off the network. Now I see there's a Q&A. I cannot hear the speaker. Well, hope you can now, Mary. I'm sure others would have said it. Okay, tools and processes. Again, probably get advice on that phone call with the forensic people. They'll tell you maybe things that you should turn on the server logs that will give you information, because later you're going to need that to understand. A few years ago, we had an incident, and we didn't know whether it was we should be worried or not. They hadn't got in. It was a brute force attack, and when we investigated, we realized there's other information we could turn on so that for future events, we'd be able to see more detail and where it's coming from and etc. So look, it's not the time after the event to be finding out, well, what tools should we have? Okay. So you're somewhat prepared, and you're now being subjected to an attack. Will you know? Will you know what to be looking out for? Awareness. People talk about situational awareness, general awareness. I would say, and this is why the refreshing of the training in cyber awareness is important, because the threats are evolving all the time. And if there is a current theme and somebody is using, I don't know, there's a new policy by the government, and somebody, some clever bad guys are using that to trick people into clicking on a link because it looks legit, because it's about something that's in the news. You need to be aware of that, and that these phishing emails or indeed dodgy emails are doing the rounds. If somebody appear in your sector, another fund, another credit union, another insurance company has experienced an attack, are you aware of that? Because you could be next. So it's about being aware of what's happening out there in the world, such that when it does happen to you, you look maybe sideways at it and say, is that happening to us? So it's important that you know what's happening as quickly as possible so that you can react. Now, I've down here analyzing the scope, but if it's a cyber attack, and you'll see in the next one, you want to react quickly. But generally, if we talk about generally an incident, you analyze it, see, is this, I think in one of the exercises we did, I think we started with an exercise that somebody says the system is down. Don't assume from that one statement that the system is down for everybody across the board. It might be just down to that individual. So quickly analyze, is this an outage for one person? Is it an outage for the whole company? Is it an industry-wide thing? So try to get to understand the scope and the nature of it quickly and classify the incident, whether it's like a cyber attack in this case or something else. And escalate. That is, notify those people who need to be notified as quickly as possible. Even if it's 11:30 on a Friday evening, you have to assume this 24/7, and your escalation, your emergency button has to work any day of the week, any time of the day. Now, I thought, I know people like the mind maps, but I thought I would also capture in some bullet points some of the points I've made. So some of these are repeat on the things you can do beforehand. For example, that vulnerability scan that you've done, if it detects vulnerabilities, address them. If it sees doors open, close them, patch the vulnerabilities, only give people access what they need, do the refresher training, encrypt all data on mobile devices. And again, you can do all of this beforehand. If somebody loses a laptop, does it matter beyond the cost of the laptop? As long as the data is encrypted and you can disconnect it from the network, what's lost? You know, you want to be able to say it's only a bit of hardware. There's no access to the data. It's all encrypted, and any access to the systems, we've removed it quickly. And this is why notification is important. If you lose a laptop, you want to call somebody so that that laptop is removed from the approved devices quickly. Now, we can do that ourselves. We can do that here within minutes, or if that happened. Privileged access, I would say keep separate from the regular access, keep a copy of the data off the network, have a plan. There's a few more contact details we covered, know to call, have agreed the teams, and who's going to lead the team, have alternates in the team, just in case the leader of the team is on holidays. Decide on roles and responsibilities of the teams, so if you're in the team, your job, should this happen, is this. You can decide all of these things beforehand. Something else you can do beforehand, and we can talk about this under exercises, but restoring the backups, because you're going to need it someday. So do you know if the restore works? We do it about 4 times a year. And draw up your detailed recovery plan with timings. This is, to get the order of things. You're limited in resources and what you can do, so do the important stuff first. So have that agreed as to what the order is. You can always change the order when the scenario unfolds. It might be slightly different, and maybe some systems aren't affected, but start with, what will be the order we should bring these things up if we did have all systems out, and exercise your plan. Okay, just some additional stuff. When you get the notes, hopefully that will prompt you again. So back to the mind map, and you see my big red button here. What I'm trying to say here is, when you know you've got a cyber attack, the first thing you really need to do is isolate the users, if you like, from the servers, from the knowledge, from the network. It's not pulling the power cord, it's more pulling the data cord, but preventing access to anything. I would caution about switching things off, because if you switch things off, information is lost. If they're still switched on, but you've just removed connectivity to the internet and to users, the forensic guys at least will be able to analyze and see what exactly has happened. I mean, that could be important forensic information. Get advice from the technical experts on this. But you want to contain the spread of whatever it is that's attacking you. Analyze, what is it? How far has it got? What's infected? And you need to start communicating to your own staff, to your customers, other stakeholders. Might be the regulator. Maybe you've got a data breach as part of this. And you need to take ownership, not ownership so much as control of the social media message. Unfortunately, it's a factor now of life that when things happen, sometimes staff find out first through Facebook or Twitter or something else before you tell them, because somebody else has got the message out there. So don't assume that the messages that get out there are accurate or true. A lot of disinformation, as we have learned over the last few years, gets out there. So take control of it, get the right message out there. Now, for those data protection officers among you, I just put in a checklist here. I won't go through it, but questions you might want to ask and why you're in the team. But again, have your checklist ready, because you need to understand, do you need to be contacting the data protection authorities or not? Okay. So let's move on. So you've understood what the issue is, the cyber attack, the nature of it, what's infected, and you know where it has come from, the root cause, so you can be a bit more confident when you eradicate it that you've got back to source. Now, depending on the nature of a cyber attack, you may have to re-image or rebuild machines. That means if you take a bit of hardware, a PC or a laptop, to reinstall everything on it. And imaging is a fast way of doing it. If all your PCs are the same setup, you could re-image all of them in half an hour. If you've kept an image of what's on them. But it's like taking a blank and putting a copy of the image of the installation straight on it. It's tried and tested technology. But you need to have this plan, because again, it's, when you have a disaster, it's not the time to go buying these tools. If you haven't got an image already, then that's of no use to you. And the same with your backups. Now, if you're restoring a backup, you need to be sure that the backup hasn't been infected. Remember, the bad guys could have been in for days and weeks. Maybe you need to go back more than one day, so that when you do restore the backup, you need to be sure that it is a clean one and not an infected one. Just a few more bullets maybe on the during. As I said in Dad's Armory, don't panic, Mr. Mannering. But yeah, keep a cool head, understand what's happening, so you know how to respond. Cut the connectivity, assemble the team, and again, think it could be 11:30 on a Friday night. Understand the nature of the attack, and is personal information disclosed? Because that is an important one, because you have a limited time period in which you need to do certain things. You've legal obligations. Tell people what's happening. Communicate to people, so that somebody else isn't making up the story. You need to take ownership of that communication. You may need to tell your insurers, depending on the attack. And if you've got cyber insurance, you probably definitely need to tell them, because they may want to send in people to make sure that the damage is limited. So be aware of your responsibilities there. Understand the full scope. And if it's a cyber attack that has compromised customer information, you need to understand that if your customer's information has been compromised, because you need to tell them. And whether it's explicit in your contract with your customer or just implicit, which I think is in every contract, you need to contact your customers, if only to reassure them that their information is secure. The eradication and the restoring of systems can take time. If you ask Maersk or ask the HSE, and you can reduce that time by being better prepared. Okay. And when you are eradicating, this layered approach, you might bring back everything in one step, bring it back in steps, and check each step that everything is still okay and that it hasn't gone south again. Okay. One of the things that I recommend, and I have done this in an incident with a customer, I was really the onlooker, but I decided to do something useful, and I started writing a log. So it has become something that I recommend to everybody now, that in that team, have somebody whose job it is to be the secretary, if you wish, to be the person who writes down decisions that were made, the time and decision that was made, the action that was taken, because later that will be useful when, talking to the insurance company to say, we did everything possible at the time. It'll also be gold dust for you when you're reviewing the incident and how you handled it. And maybe reviewing the cold light of day. Well, if we did that half an hour earlier or before that, it would have been better. People's memories are poor. If you write it down, you'll be surprised later. Did it really take us that long to do that, to make that decision? So do write it down. It's the most useful thing you will do in any incident. Trust me, been there. Okay. So you've eradicated and you're in the recovery mode now. You're restoring the systems. I would say when you're restoring, you need to do those testing as if the system was new. And it's, again, not the time to be thinking of what would we test. I've done this in the past when we used to do a major upgrade on a system, and in a previous life, and we had 250,000 customers, and any update always had the potential of bringing the system to its knees. So we had about a dozen use cases. So adding a new customer, putting up a work order, adding a service, and we picked out those 12 use cases, and they became part of our test. So whenever we made a change, we ran these 12 tests, and that gave us, a high level of confidence that everything was working fine. Again, you can decide on these things long before an incident, so that when an incident happens, you can pick a team and say, carry out those 12 tests. And it could be 12 people, or one person doing 12. So you need to know what you're looking for, to confirm that it is working fine. We have eliminated whatever the cause was, and you need to have a high level of confidence so you can keep building that recovery. And communicate. Tell people what you're doing. Tell them, when they can expect to have the service back. Don't sell hope, but tell them honestly. Tell the truth. It's easier to remember what you said. And when it's all over and you're back up and running, don't leave it too long afterwards, but do a review. How was it handled? Did the plan stand up to the test? It could be improved. I have a bunch of questions. This is probably better. Could we have handled this better? Importantly, for many of you would be, did you stay within your impact tolerances? And these are impact tolerances. If you're, and I guess because you're here today, you will know about the regulator's guidance on resilience and the focus they have on impact tolerances. If you've had an incident, the first question I would ask as a director is, did we stay within our impact tolerances? And if not, why not? And are the tolerances too tight? Can we relax them, or do we need to do something to stay within them? That's important. The gaps in the plan. There will be gaps in the plan. So what are they, and what are you going to do to fix them? Do we have all the people? Lessons learned is another way of saying update your plan with the learnings. You will have lessons learned in every incident, whether it's an exercise and a simulation or a real life incident. You will learn stuff you didn't know yesterday. Some remediation might take weeks or months, but do have a plan and do set expectations with the stakeholders, which might be the board or the regulator, as to when you're going to fix it. But fix it as quickly as possible, obviously. You may need a budget. You may need to spend money to shore up the defenses, whatever you need to do. Get on with it. The incident was yesterday. Now you need to plan for the future and make sure it doesn't happen again. You should report that incident to the senior management team and the board as appropriate. It's, we'll learn from every incident. And if I could encourage, if I give you one message from today, it's learn from mistakes. Don't beat up the person who made the mistake, but treat it as a learning opportunity. And the bigger the mistake, the bigger the opportunity to learn, would be my philosophy. Now, many of you already are members of, I would call them peer groups, where you share information. I would encourage the sharing of information, not publicly, but within groups that are similar to you, and learn from each other. We learn faster if we can learn from other people's mistakes, don't we? Okay. I'm going to give myself another 5 minutes, and then I'll let you ask some questions. I took this definition of crisis and incident from technical spec 17090. I'll have it on the next one. Crisis, an unprecedented or extraordinary event or situation that threatens an organization and requires a strategic, adaptive, and timely response in order to preserve its viability and integrity. I couldn't improve on that. That's a good definition of a crisis. Whereas an incident, it's an adverse event that might be or could lead to a disruption, a loss, emergency, or crisis. So an incident is anything from, I guess, a near miss, and whoa, that was close, to something that is handled badly and then becomes a crisis. So it's the full range. But generally, incidents are things that we consider foreseeable, and we can plan for them. So if you're living in an area that floods, you know what it looks like, and you can plan for a flood and maybe keep everything up on the first floor that could be damaged by water, etc. So you can plan for those. They lend themselves to pre-planned response measures. Implications of variable, that you don't know the timing or the nature of the spread, but you know what a flood looks like. Whereas a crisis, generally, they're unique, rare, unforeseen. They could be poorly managed events, and this requires more of that strategic adaptation. Well, if you've done good planning, it's my opinion that if you've done the planning and you've considered all of the contingencies and options, then when it comes to a crisis, you've done a lot of the hard work because you've considered things before and you know what will work or won't work, and it'll help you later to manage a crisis. Indeed, if we look at the principles for managing a crisis, and again, this is taken from the same document, the technical specification 17091, 1991. And if you look at these 10, nothing is, I would say, all of them apply to an incident as well, aren't they? Seek understanding of the situation. Makes sense. What's happening, what's going on. Seek it quickly and achieve control as quickly as possible. So you're driving the bus. Communicate both internally and externally. And again, I would say it probably many times, communicate. It's the thing we do least well in incidents. Be prepared with clear, universally understood structures, roles, and responsibilities. This is the plan. The people know the role, the responsibility. They know they belong to the operations team. They belong to the IT response team, whatever it is. They know where to go in the event of an incident. Build situational awareness by good information management and coordinated working. That's the liaison. That's the communication internally, understanding, getting the information to the people who need it quickly. Have a clear, well-rehearsed decision-making and action-driving process. Now, this is one, again, where you can do a bit of work in advance, but it's where I see, paralysis through analysis, people not making decisions because they don't feel they have enough information. You can, in your plan, already have thought about this and say, if that and that and that, is present at the time, then we will do this. Better you make a decision, too soon and go too soon than you wait and delay it and cause more damage. But if you have some decision-making matrices that help you make that decision, or indeed if some people are out and you have to make, other people who don't normally make these decisions have to make a decision, they have a guideline and say, well, that and that and that is the situation, then we need to do Y. I think it's leadership as well in the organization. And if you ask me, who should lead, it's not always obvious. When you have an incident, leadership skills often appear in people that you didn't expect it from. So I would be training and making sure that you have the skills when you need them. Yeah, and train people. If you're going to have a spokesperson, if you're a large organization and you're going to have to go in front of the cameras and going to have to speak, then maybe you will train somebody in that. And maybe you would have an outsider, a consultant who will be your spokesperson, who's used to standing in front of the cameras and being able to speak on your behalf. But decide on one. Make sure that nobody else, that it's not the message coming from 10 different people in the organization, but coming from one source. Learn and evolve from experience and actual events. This is the lessons learned lesson. So I think you'll agree, none of these 10 principles are really any different, whether it's a crisis or whether it's an incident. Just with the crisis, they just need to be, you need to have, I suppose, better skills and respond more quickly. Okay. A word in communications, and we're nearly there, folks. What, when? we did a couple of facilitated exercises with an organization years ago, and when we poked a microphone in front of the face of the director of communications, she didn't know what to say, and she said, "I don't know," I think, to my question, and that caused a huge rumpus because she wasn't prepared. And when we did the same exercise some weeks later, and we did this again, she had to prepare the script. And a lot of communications, you can almost think of the templates you want to use, the reassuring words that you can say anytime. We'll write them down so that the blanks you have to fill in, are 10, 20% of the message. So I think there's a lot you can think of beforehand. Who will you need to communicate with? The customers, the regulator, the staff, and what sort of information will you need to tell them? You can build your checklist, build your templates in advance so that when the actual incident happens, you can fill in the blanks. You have a lot of the donkey work done, as it were. Again, pick the spokesperson for the organization, for the department, depending on your organization, and make sure everybody else knows. And if they're asked questions by, journalists trying to get a scoop, speak to Jerry. They're pointed to the spokesperson. Don't assume that the mobile network will always work. It doesn't take. Anybody's gone to a rugby match and tried to, communicate at half time. You'll find it's busy, and it gets busy fairly quickly. If there's a disaster, an area-wide disaster, the mobile phone network is probably, not that it's down, but it's just congested. WhatsApp, yeah, that might be a useful one. Again, it needs internet connectivity, but data connectivity might be more readily available than a voice connection. Do people have landlines? I remember in one disaster scenario, the only landline that was working was the fax telephone, because it was powered by An Post at the time, or Aircom, and not from the in-house telephone system. It was the only telephone line that worked in the organization. The internet, if you're going to communicate over the internet, maybe you have a hidden page on your website, and your staff who are at home and have access can get on and get a message. Anyway, you need to think about it in advance, in the plan, so people know where to go to get information. And test your communications. If you have a call tree, and I'm going to call 3 people, and those 3 people are going to call 3 others, have you ever tested that? Does it work? Are the numbers still up to date? And I think my second last slide, scenario exercises, and I'm just picking the one here. This is the desktop one. There are others, but I've just picked this one type. It's sitting around a table maybe for 2 hours. Somebody constructs a credible scenario. It has to be credible, plausible, otherwise people won't engage. And the facilitator gradually unfolds the scenario, like it's 11:30 on a Friday night. Johnny is working late. He clicks on a link, and now he thinks he's unleashed a cyber attack. Right. What's he going to do? And I would say to you, as the company, I would say, now, what will he do? Does he know what to do? Does he know to pick up the phone and call an emergency number? And gradually then, it's 2 hours later, it's a day later, you unfold the scenario. And you can do this for different scenarios, whether it's a power failure or a cyber attack, or, telecoms failure. You can pick your scenario and create it. The idea, the whole objective of doing these scenarios is that staff are familiar with the plan and their role. You will find out if everything is as you thought it was when you wrote the plan. Are the resources available when you need them? Maybe a key person, and you can do this, and we've done it. You pick 2 people who say you're not available. You can sit in on the table, but you're only there to observe and see if the organization can survive while you're on holidays in Tenerife. But you will identify areas for improvement. Absolutely. It'll be a poor exercise that doesn't identify at least 10 things that you can improve. And if this is done well, and you've got teams working together, you get a great teamwork working together, and people realize quickly it's best if it's credible and plausible and they can really react as if it was happening. And you see that teamwork evolving and creating. It's 2 hours of time. So it's minimal disruption to business. It's taking the senior people and anybody who's going to be involved in the recovery and the response out for 2 hours. The work is done really beforehand in creating the scenario, and then and maybe afterwards writing up that report to say, okay, need to do these 10 things now, and then if there's a disaster, we need to change the plan and have these 10 things different in the plan. And I think finally, after the exercise, after an event, update your plan. It could be after an audit. An auditor comes in, looks at your plan, and they might spot something that you haven't thought about. But don't consider the plan a job done. It's just now something, a basis that you can improve and should improve on over time. Update lists. Suppliers will change, employees will change. You know, you need to be constantly updating those lists. And I would keep a copy of this plan, certainly off-site and off a network, so that you can get your hands on it. Put a version control on the plan so that you can take the old versions out of circulation. So that's it, folks. But before I go to the Q&A, just one slide for advertisement. When the series is over, webinars, which are free and they're 1 hour, we're doing 4 workshops, each of them 2 hours. Again, 2 weeks apart. We do exercises. It's like this, but with exercises and a bit more depth. If you're interested, you'll see more on our website. Okay, I'll prompt you with that each week. So if you have questions, I see there's one there already, so I will have a look. Not a question, I'll read it out, okay? But a bit of advice. We in Newington had a power cut recently, and we found out that our UPS only kept us going for 20 minutes instead of 2 hours because it wasn't an update to date UPS. It wasn't an update to date UPS. Okay, this created further problems. Make sure that you have the correct UPS system in place. Lesson learned. Okay, I know this myself because we used to have another business where we had a UPS that could take the load for 1 hour. The UPS is an uninterruptible power supply. Generally, if you have a power cut and you have a UPS, the UPS is like battery backup, and it'll supply 220 volts. It inverts the battery, and so it takes from 400 DC volts, it makes 220 mains, and it'll power your systems, but only for so long as the battery has juice. You should get your UPS tested. We used to test it every 6 months, and one of the tests was to switch off the mains and see the discharge pattern, and you could quickly predict this will last for 68 minutes, I think was the last one. We were always around the 68, 70, but in the beginning it used to be 90 minutes, and as we increased the load on the UPS, that 90 went down to 68. Our guarantee was 1 hour, but thank you, Conor. That's a good lesson. So get somebody to tell you how long will your UPS carry the load, and do you have an emergency switch down procedure? Because if you know you've only got 20 minutes, you probably need to go to those servers and start switching them down, because a server that loses power in an uncontrolled way, much more difficult to get it back up and running. Denise, is there anyone on this webinar who went through a cyber attack, applied the best practices, and is willing to give a high-level overview of the main pitfalls they experienced and the areas that worked particularly well? That's not a bad idea, Denise. I actually have a friend, a mate, who worked in a large organization, and he experienced 2 cyber attacks, both of which they handled within, one of them 15 minutes and the other, I think, about 20 minutes, he said, successfully. So maybe it might be an idea to get a guest speaker who's been there and has been through a bad one. So, yeah, I'll repeat what Denise said. If any of you out there have had a cyber attack and maybe have a colleague or yourself who's willing to speak about it, that might be an idea for a future webinar. Thank you, Denise, on that. Okay, there's a few more. Anonymous, when it comes to op resilience framework policies, should this be an overarching policy document incorporating BCP and incident response, or have you any guidance? To Anonymous, I would say overarching, because I think a lot of organizations have good business continuity already. You're not throwing out the baby with bathwater, but I think start at the top with operational resilience. So we're going to do this, and we're going to focus on, remember, it's about the critical services. So at the overarching, at the top level, you decide, well, what is critical? What is a critical service? Which are included? We have 20 things we do. Which ones are critical? And maybe you decide on 4 of them. And you work through, again, it's risk management, it's information security, it's the incident management, the business continuity and the recovery. So absolutely, I would have an overall framework, but don't reinvent the wheel. Those frameworks should bring the business continuity and other bits in. Okay, will we share slides? Yes, we'll share the slides, and this is being recorded as well. So that will be on our probably our YouTube channel. We've lots of recordings, by the way. If it's your first one here, we have a YouTube channel, so you can subscribe to that, and we'll send you a notification when we add anything to it. Okay. We still have 3 minutes if there's any other questions. I had one in my own head that maybe I didn't address while I'm waiting for another question, if you're going to ask one. Who should lead the response? And I remember doing a facilitated exercise some years ago, and the operations, head of operations was leading it and gathering the information, and wouldn't make a decision. And eventually the head of sales said, Joe, and I'm making up the name, but this really happened. He said, we got to go now. And it was a power outage scenario. And he said, the power's out, it's out in the street, staff are going to be late to work. And he knew exactly what was going to happen in the next hour or two. And he had it sussed. And it was very clear that he would probably make a better job of leading the response. So be open to that. Be open to deciding on who should actually lead the response. I say be open to it because it is a skill as well. And my personal experience, when we had a power outage, it wasn't me or the IT manager, but it was actually an IT ops guy we let manage the scenario, because he knew what to do, and he was able to fire off instructions. He had 4 people that he could get to work and fixing it. So be open to that. Okay. Anything else? Okay. I hope I gave it enough time. Do let us know if this format works in terms of. I mean, I squeezed a lot in maybe to 45 minutes still, but hopefully it was at a level of detail that gave you some food for thought, and be able to go back to your own organizations and check, well, what have we got in the plan? And just have in mind that plans can always be improved. But when you do have an incident, it may not be one you thought about, but if you've at least done the hard work and planning and thought about the different contingencies, you'll be able to adapt on the day to the scenario and modify. Okay. I think we're going to call it at that then. Okay. Yeah, I think that's it. So thank you for your attendance. Hope you got something from that, and see you back in 2 weeks, same time on Tuesday in 2 weeks. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.